I woke up in a strange underground basement, with my 9-month-old child still in my womb. Hello everyone, my name's Ashley and I'm married to Marcus. I have an elder brother, a stepmother, and my father. I lost my mother when I was only a teen, and that affected me more than I would have ever imagined. I went into shock and lost my ability to speak. My dad tried everything to help me speak. He took me to different therapists, tried to help me himself, all in vain. My elder brother tried too, but I wouldn't speak. As time passed, it got worse and everyone accepted the fact that I might never speak again. It affected me heavily in school because my friends and classmates refused to be friends with a dumb girl. With no one talking to me at school, my condition worsened. My dad was worried and even blamed himself. My mom was asthmatic and he hadn't realized she was out of inhaler. She died alone at home after she got an attack and had no inhaler to use. He couldn't stop blaming her death on his forgetfulness. I watched him do that, and all I wanted to do was tell him not to blame himself, but how could I do that with a tied tongue? So, instead of trying to speak, I would often hug him in a bid to comfort him. Unfortunately, he misunderstood the gesture and always thought I was hugging him because I felt lonely. Yes, I was lonely, but I knew he was too. I tried to signal to him countless times that he was misunderstanding my gesture. I even wrote it a few times on a piece of paper and gave it to him to read, but he refused to believe. He thought I was only saying that to make him feel better.
You don't have to pretend with me, Ashley. I know you're lonely. I'm so sorry. I wish I wasn't so careless to let your mother die like that.
Well, it went like that until I had to stop giving him those hugs which I thought were comforting. I also stopped trying to communicate with him through writings. I became withdrawn. My brother was obviously miserable about the whole thing. Our dad was always blaming himself, and I was becoming more withdrawn. We began to grow apart, and that affected me even more. I developed anxiety, and it began affecting my study. My grades dropped drastically by the end of that session, and I nearly cried my eyes out. I hated myself because I knew I'd become weak, and it wasn't something my mom would have encouraged if she were alive. I prayed and wished for a miracle because I was tired of living as a dumb girl. Well, my wish seemed to be granted when my dad came home with a middle-aged woman one day and introduced her as Margaret, his girlfriend. That was 3 years after my mom's death, and I was a freshman in college. Margaret was so beautiful. My jaw nearly dropped when I saw her. Her smile was so bright, and she seemed like a very nice and friendly woman. When my dad introduced her, my elder brother was the first to hug her, and I followed after. I saw how relaxed my dad was when we both hugged her, and I could tell that he'd been scared about us not accepting Margaret. Well, 2 weeks after Margaret's last visit, she came again. This time she came with her daughter. I was surprised to see that she had a child as grown as me, but I didn't speak. I mean, I couldn't, even if I wanted to. Her daughter Eve was just as stunning as Margaret. She didn't seem as friendly as her mother. I noticed from her body language that she was full of herself, so I resolved to not be too close to her.
Is this the dumb daughter? I'm glad to finally meet you, Chloe. My mom told me your mom died a few years back. I feel so sorry for you.
I thought she was being insensitive and looked to my dad to stop her, but he was simply smiling at her like she was a gold medal. I took it in and managed to control my anger throughout the time Margaret and Eve were there. Both were so loud and annoying that I had to nurse a headache for 2 whole days. Well, it didn't take long before Eve and Margaret finally moved in with us. My brother seemed to be fine with it, but I wasn't. I didn't want to see Margaret and Eve every day of my life. At some point, I felt I was being selfish and decided to simply take in whatever they gave. And they gave a lot. Margaret was the direct opposite of who she pretended to be. She was pure evil. Her daughter wasn't any better. If Margaret was Lucifer, then Eve was her biggest demon. They put on a perfect act with me whenever my dad or brother was present, but when they were gone, I returned to hell. Eve and her mother would starve me, hit me, mock me, and even make me steal from my dad. It happened every time until my dad stopped keeping his money in his drawer. The new position was somewhere I couldn't steal from, and that made me happy. Unfortunately, my joy was short-lived. Eve and Margaret forced me to steal one day from his new hiding spot. Unfortunately, I got caught by my dad. I would tell him what happened, but there was no way I could communicate with him. He wasn't even keen on listening to me. My dad yelled at me until I was sobbing heavily. He told me how disappointed he was, and I felt my heart sink. I'd never seen my dad so angry. I continued crying until he stormed out. My brother came into the kitchen and hugged me. Once I was calm, he gave me a book and pencil and asked me to explain what happened. And I did so. Afterward, my brother sighed and hugged me again. It continued like that with Margaret and Eve until, thankfully, I met Marcus and we fell in love. 6 months later, I got engaged to Marcus. Marcus was everything to me. He loved me without minding the fact that I was unable to speak. I felt comfortable with him and didn't waste a second before giving him a yes when he proposed marriage to me. I met his parents and they loved me like I was their biological child. I was so happy with Marcus and his family. They were eager to meet mine, so I arranged one quickly. My dad seemed to be excited about it, as well as my brother. I couldn't tell if Margaret and her daughter were excited too, because it was a video call, but the two weren't there, even though I could hear their voices in the background. Anyway, 2 weeks later, Marcus and his family came over to visit us. I couldn't contribute to their discussion because I couldn't speak, but I was able to use my hands and facial expressions. I was enjoying it all until my stepmother suddenly began talking about embarrassing things I'd supposedly done. At first, Marcus and everyone was laughing, but they stopped when she was prolonging the stories. Some showed that she was straight up mocking me. That didn't sit right with them, and they stopped laughing. My stepmother seemed to notice because she also stopped and waved it off with laughter. After they left, Marcus called me at night to apologize for my stepmother's insensitivity. My brother also apologized because he very much knew she was making those jokes and saying those embarrassing moments to spite me. Thankfully, my wedding approached very quickly. 2 weeks after that family meeting, Marcus and I got married. It was a small wedding, like I'd wanted, with only family and close friends. I was so happy at the wedding. I'd never imagined being in a wedding gown because I thought no one would like me enough to make me their wife because I was dumb. After our wedding, Marcus encouraged me to start taking therapy again. Of course, I listened to him. I was grown enough and knew I needed to teach myself how to speak again. Only Marcus knew I was getting therapy again. My dream was to be able to show off my speaking voice to my family on my next birthday. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. My therapist was perfect at her job, barely 6 months in, and I'd already been able to speak quite properly. By then, I was sure that my words would be clearer by my next birthday. It was 2 years after my wedding. I was already 9 months pregnant, and I'd gone to visit my dad and brother. Unfortunately, I met Margaret and Eve instead.
What are you doing here? You should be in your husband's house, not my dad's house.
As much as I wanted to remind her that he was my dad first and still was my dad, I kept silent. They would discover my secret immediately if I did. I simply nodded and turned to leave, but Margaret stopped me.
Stay for tea. It's your father's house after all.
I didn't want to have tea or speak to them, so I refused by shaking my head. Very politely. However, Margaret refused to let me leave until after tea. I began to struggle with her to leave. Before I knew it, I felt a rod hit me in the back of my head, and I stopped struggling with Margaret. Everywhere blacked out immediately after I fell. When I woke up again, I was in a basement. It reeked of rotten things and made me nauseous. I was so hungry and thirsty, but there was nothing for me to eat or drink. I immediately remembered where I'd kept my phone and quickly took it out. Luckily, Margaret and Eve hadn't managed to find it. I saw that it was still recording everything, and I smiled. The audio recording was meant to record my dad and brother's verbal reaction. Without wasting any more time, I texted my husband and explained my situation to him. He had access to my location and assured me he'd be there with the cops as quickly as possible. Margaret and Eve came in immediately after I'd tucked my phone back into my bra.
We're lucky to have you, dumb girl. The buyer gave a high amount.
I could have Marcus to myself, too.
I nearly scoffed. After mistreating me for years, they were planning to sell me off to a couple that wanted my baby and take my husband, too. Apparently, they wanted to get rid of the dumb girl and next my brother so they could inherit almost everything my dad had when he died. How much more unfair could they be? They didn't even consider my unborn child. Well, barely 30 minutes later, Marcus arrived with the cops. They were very discreet, so Margaret and Ashley, alongside the couple who'd bought me, were all caught and arrested while Marcus took me to the hospital. My dad and brother were shocked to hear the news and couldn't stop asking if I was fine. As soon as I left the hospital, 3 days later, I got ready to testify against Margaret and Eve in court. You can imagine their shocked faces when they heard me speaking for the first time. My dad and brother had cried at the hospital when they heard me. As for Margaret and her daughter, they were both found guilty of kidnapping and human trafficking. Them, alongside the buyers, all got a life sentence each. I had my son 2 weeks after, and our household was thrown into happiness. My dad forgot about Margaret and Eve so quickly that I had to question whether they ever had anything real between them. It turned out that my dad got to know she was a terrible person and simply waited until she broke up with him. Both mother and daughter suffered greatly in jail. They tried to escape once with the traffickers, but were shot and caught by the cops. Margaret got a bullet in her spine, Eve in both her arms, while one of the 3 traffickers got shot in the head and died. When I heard what happened, I couldn't be any happier. They absolutely deserved every misfortune they encountered. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below, saying I subscribed, and we will try our best to reply to your comment. I told them he threatened me with being a cop and they decided to go home with me. James lived 2 buildings after mine, and the man only went to work on the weekend. When the cops got to his door and made him come out, he was visibly scared.
Hey, which precinct are you with? The 5th. 5th was shut down last year. Who's your captain? Smith. There's no Captain Smith in this district. Badge number? 7,842. 7,842 belongs to Officer Harris. You sure that's yours? Yeah, I think so. Think so? Turn around. You're not a cop. Let's sort this out at the station.
Well, it turned out that he wasn't a cop and only said that to scare me. Sometimes he will wear cop uniform, so I actually thought he was a cop. I got a fake police officer arrested after months of swallowing his dirty attitudes. My name's Amoy, and I'm black, originally from Jamaica. I moved to the USA into a neighborhood with a lot of white Americans and was not accepted by the majority of them. I used to work at a traveling agency in Jamaica, and my neighbors were all good to me. I got a promotion and got transferred to the States, and my neighbors were completely different from the ones in Jamaica. The first day I arrived, I caught some people eyeing me with disgusting gazes. It was quite surprising because I did nothing to offend them, but I ignored everything and focused on arranging my new home. The next day, I needed to look around to find nearby hospitals, eateries, and also clubs, as I loved to club every weekend. Unfortunately, even the taxi drivers there didn't like me. I flagged down about 3, and when they stopped and saw me, they would simply drive away. Eventually, one stopped and even smiled at me before I got in. I did find the buildings I was looking for, and luckily, they weren't so far from where I lived. When I returned home, I was so tired, so I fell asleep. But I was awoken by loud bangings on my door. I forcefully woke up and went to the door. There, an angry-looking man was staring at me. I asked what he wanted, and shockingly, he threw a bucket of snow into my house.
This is to warn you to never cross paths with me, else I'll harm you in ways you never imagined.
I was confused. I'd never even met him. I was surprised as to how he found my house and felt he was right to attack me like that. Before I could speak, he turned and left. I stood at the door for what seemed like minutes before I finally went in and cleaned the snow from my hallway. I resumed work 2 days later and was wise enough to avoid everyone in my neighborhood. I didn't say hi to any, neither did I even make eye contact with them. I needed to avoid troubles as best as I could. Unfortunately for me, I fell into one a week later. It was a Saturday and I didn't have work. With no one to talk to, I left home and went to a nearby park. When I got there, I saw that there were a lot of people there. I nearly left because I wanted some peace and quiet, but I decided to stay. I found a bench beneath a broad tree and went to sit there, facing the lake in front of it. Just when I was finally enjoying nature, I heard a familiar voice behind me.
I warned you to never cross paths with me, you idiot.
When I turned, I saw James, the man who threw snow into my house. I wondered what he wanted from me this time. What do you mean? I was sitting alone.
That's my seat. You're watching me, aren't you? What? Did you come here to spy on rich people so you can attack them with your black boyfriend?
Where did that even come from? I was so confused. I tried to explain to him that I met the bench empty, but he slapped me instead. The shock and force of the slap made me fall on my butt. "Do you know what you just did?"
Of course I do. If you dare try to get on my nerves again, you'll receive more than a slap, you silly thing.
He was so rude. I stood up, dusted my clothes, and threatened to report him to the cops.
Oh great, I work as a cop, and I'm gonna make sure you're put behind bars. I dare you to report this.
That scared me. If he was a cop in such racist place, then I would have no chance. There was no way his colleagues would support me and throw him under the bus. I felt so miserable and angry as I walked back home. I went straight to bed to avoid overthinking. The next day after work, I saw that someone had poured dirt all over my front porch. Tears formed in my eyes as I stared at it. I was so tired from the long day I had. I hadn't imagined that I would have to clean the place again. Of course, I had no idea who did. My neighbors hated me. Any of them could have done it. I dropped my bag on the floor and began clearing the place. It took me about 20 minutes before I finally finished. I crashed on the couch immediately and fell asleep. The next morning, when I got out of the house to go to work, I nearly fell into a pile of dirt in front of my door. Again. This time, I saw James standing a few steps away.
Come on, report to the cops. I'd like to see you in jail, impersonator.
I wondered who I was impersonating to be called the name. I was tempted to go to the station, but again, I remembered that he was a cop and I couldn't win against a cop. I wasn't having any fun at all with how life was going. James refused to get off my back. He was always doing something to make me feel angry. I noticed that all my other neighbors had stopped looking at me with those disgusting eyes. Instead, they ignored me. I was grateful for that and wished James would do the same, but he was adamant on making my life a living hell. One day, on my way home from work, I came across two elderly ladies carrying heavy bags. I was tempted to help them with it, but I was also scared of getting shooed away. Unable to watch them struggle with the bags any longer, I went forward and asked to help them. They looked surprised, but allowed me. Even though I was tired, I carried the bags to their home, and they were so thankful to me. Another day, I helped a little injured girl by carrying her home, and her parents had the same look of surprise before they thanked me. I helped other neighbors randomly whenever they seemed to need help. Luckily, they never refused, and always thanked me afterward. James didn't stop harassing. Once, he even threw an egg at me right after I stepped out of my house to head to work. I was forced to go back in and change my clothes. I would report him to my neighbors, but even though I'd helped them a lot of times, I wasn't close enough to them to initiate any conversation. I felt so alone and frustrated by James's actions. One day, after he poured paint on me for shutting my door too loudly, I decided that I'd had enough. The next morning, I headed straight to the station to report James. Surprisingly, the cops weren't racists as I'd expected. When I told them about all of his behaviors, they were both shocked and irritated. I told them he threatened me with being a cop and they decided to go home with me. James lived 2 buildings after mine, and the man only went to work on the weekend. When the cops got to his door and made him come out, he was visibly scared.
Hey, which precinct are you with? The 5th. 5th was shut down last year. Who's your captain? Smith. There's no Captain Smith in this district. Badge number? 7,842. 7,842 belongs to Officer Harris. You sure that's yours? Yeah, I think so. Think so? Turn around. You're not a cop. Let's sort this out at the station.
Well, it turned out that he wasn't a cop and only said that to scare me. Sometimes he will wear cop uniform, so I actually thought he was a cop. I couldn't believe that he made me believe such a lie for 2 months. He was immediately arrested. At the station, the cops were angry at him for being racist and also lying about who he was. He was kept in the cell until I was ready to press charges. Before he was taken in, he cried and apologized to me. That was giving me second thoughts about pressing charges. I decided to let him be in the custody of the cops before I could finalize what to do to him. Shockingly, 2 days later, I got a call from the station. James had escaped. I was so scared. How was it possible for him to escape the custody of the cops? I was so scared because I suspected him coming after me. Well, my suspicions were true because I came home from the station to see that someone had broken into my house. Before leaving, I'd left a few dollar bills on my table and I returned to see it gone. I knew James broke into my house and stole them. I contacted the police to tell them about it, and they promised to find James and arrest him. I lived in fear. At night, I would hear knocks on my windows and door, but if I went to check, I would find no one there. Other times, I would see a poster of a clown there. I could barely sleep. I was restless and uncomfortable. One day, while doing my laundry, I heard my front door open and the sound of footsteps. I began trembling as I walked out of the bathroom. When I reached the living room, I didn't find anyone. Before I could turn, someone's hand came around my neck and put me in a headlock. I tried to scream, but the grip was too strong.
Didn't I warn you to not mess with me? How dare you report me to the cops?
He let go of me and manhandled me to face him, then slapped me harshly, causing me to yelp and fall to the floor. I screamed for help, but another slap shut me up. James began to hit me. He threw punches and slaps everywhere, laughing as he did. He then started throwing petrol to set my house on fire with me in it. Luckily for me, 3 of my neighbors rushed into my house and pulled James away. Apparently, they'd heard my scream and rushed over. They gave James a few punches to weaken him before they tied him and called the cops, who came and took him away. I followed them, alongside my neighbors. On the way, they kept asking if I was okay. I felt so grateful to them because I hadn't expected anyone to help me. James ended up going to jail because he was found guilty after I wasted no time in pressing charges. Most of my neighbors came to me to apologize on his behalf, and also the way they treated me when I first moved in. Of course, I forgave them. The others would give me reassuring stares if we crossed paths or ask if I was doing good. It felt so great to see that my neighbors didn't have any more hatred for me. Some cab drivers were still racists, as well as some people in the club, but I didn't mind. I just avoided them. After a month in jail, James tried to escape again, but he was caught and shot at by the cops. After his wound was treated, he was moved to another prison where dangerous criminals were. They found out about James's attempt to escape prison, just to assault a black woman and burn her house, which made them furious. This led to him being severely beaten. He ended up with a fractured nose, broken legs and ribs, and a deep wound in his left eye. Again, he was taken to the hospital where the doctor accidentally sent a nurse who was still learning to treat James. The nurse injected him wrongly, and he got injured in the butt, which caused him to lie on his chest for weeks. Eventually, he returned to jail, but with a nearly blind eye and a permanent ankle injury that caused him to limp. I requested to be sent back to Jamaica, and the company agreed. I left the city 2 months later, and I'm at peace here. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.